picture the scene. It is May 1944. You are sitting in the freezing mud at the Battle of Monte Cassino, which is basically the meat grinder of the Italian campaign. The sky is screaming with artillery, the ground is shaking under your boots, and you are desperately waiting for someone to bring up more ammunition before the German guns blow your position to pieces. Through the smoke, you see a figure walking upright toward the gun line. He is carrying a 100-pound crate of high explosives that normally takes 4 grown men to lift. He doesn't flinch at the explosions. He doesn't drop a single shell. He casually sets the box down, salutes the commanding officer, grabs a bottle of beer, and then eats a lit cigarette hole. Oh, and one more thing. This soldier is a 6-foot-tall, 500-pound Syrian brown bear named Wojtek, and he literally holds a higher military rank than most of the humans on the battlefield. I know, that sounds like a fever dream you would have after playing way too much Call of Duty following a dental surgery. But I promise you, every single bit of this is documented historical fact. So how on earth did a wild apex predator end up with an official army serial number, a government paycheck, and a confirmed combat record? Well, to understand the strangest military career in human history, we have to rewind to a dusty mountain road in Iran, where a group of broken men were about to make the best, worst impulse purchase of all time. It is the spring of 1942. A company of Polish soldiers, specifically the 2nd Transport Company, which would later become the legendary 22nd Artillery Supply Company, are marching through Iran. Now, these guys had just been released from Soviet gulags in Siberia. They were starved, exhausted, traumatized, and thousands of miles from home with literally nothing to their names. They desperately needed a miracle, or at the very least a distraction. What they found was a young Iranian shepherd boy carrying a burlap sack. Inside that sack was a tiny, orphaned Syrian brown bear cub whose mother had just been killed by hunters. The soldiers took one look at this sad, fuzzy little potato and immediately did what any rational group of lonely, heavily armed guys would do. They emptied their pockets. They traded the boy a Swiss Army knife, a tin of canned beef, and some chocolate, and walked away with a bear. They named him Wojtek, which is a traditional Polish name that translates roughly to "he who enjoys war," or "happy warrior," which is either hilarious or terrifying depending on whether you are sharing a tent with him. But there was an immediate logistical problem. How do you feed a baby bear when you are an army unit on the move in the Middle East? You improvise. The soldiers emptied an old vodka bottle, washed it out, fashioned a makeshift nipple out of a piece of rag, and bottle-fed this apex predator a steady diet of condensed milk. And as Wojtek grew, let us just say his dietary preferences shifted from baby food to the diet of a divorced construction worker. Within a year, Wojtek went from a helpless cub to an absolute unit of a bear, weighing hundreds of pounds. But because he was raised entirely by soldiers, he had zero concept of being a wild animal. He was, for all intents and purposes, just one of the boys. A really hairy, incredibly strong frat brother who slept in their tents when it got cold outside. His absolute favorite treat was beer. And I do not mean a polite sip. Wojtek would chug an entire bottle of beer, and if it was empty, he would peer into the bottleneck with this look of profound betrayal, waiting for a refill. When he was not drinking beer, his morning routine consisted of a nice hot cup of coffee and a smoke break. Now, when I say he smoked cigarettes, I mean the soldiers would light a cigarette, give him one puff, and then Wojtek would just chew it up and swallow it like a mint. I am pretty sure eating tobacco violates every health advisory on the planet. But when you are a 500-pound bear living in a combat zone, the Surgeon General generally minds his own business. The soldiers taught him how to march on his hind legs. They taught him how to raise his paw and give a crisp military salute to visiting officers. He even loved play wrestling with the men. And the best part is that Wojtek apparently understood the concept of sportsmanship. He would gently pin a terrifyingly fragile human soldier to the dirt, tap them, and then let them up without ever drawing a single drop of blood. He was the ultimate camp mascot and the greatest morale booster a bunch of displaced exiles could ever ask for. But speaking of camp morale, let us talk about the time Wojtek accidentally became a counterintelligence agent while completely naked in a shower. You see, Wojtek had one major addiction outside of beer and cigarettes. He loved cold showers. In the scorching desert heat of the Middle East, he learned how to turn on the camp's shower faucets, and he would happily stand under the running water for hours until the base literally ran out of fresh water. Eventually, the commanding officers had to ban Wojtek from the shower bathhouse and put a heavy lock on the door. One hot afternoon, Wojtek decided he did not care about army regulations. He waddled over to the bathhouse, shoved his massive shoulder against the door, and busted it open to get his fix. But he was not alone. Hiding inside the showers was a local enemy spy who had snuck into the Allied camp to steal weapons and gather intelligence on troop movements. Imagine you are a secret agent. You have successfully infiltrated a heavily guarded military base. You are hiding in the shadows, holding your breath, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the door explodes open, and blocking your only exit is an angry 500-pound bear who just wants to wash his armpits. The spy screamed so loud that the entire camp came running with their rifles drawn. They found the spy curled up in a corner, absolutely terrified, begging to be arrested, while Wojtek just stood there looking confused. The spy gave up vital intelligence, and Wojtek was rewarded with 2 cold beers and unlimited shower privileges for the rest of the week. But as fun as camp life was, the holiday was about to end. The Allies were mounting the invasion of Italy, and the Polish Second Corps was ordered to board British transport ships in Egypt to join the front lines. And that is where our bear ran face first into the most ruthless enemy of the Second World War, British military bureaucracy. When the Polish soldiers arrived at the docks in Alexandria, Egypt, the British transport authorities took one look at Wojtek and said absolutely not. British Army regulations strictly forbade pets and animals on combat transport ships. The port official basically told the Poles to leave their dog-sized bear behind or miss the boat. Now remember, these Polish soldiers had lost their homes, their country, and their families to the war. Wojtek was the only family they had left. There was no way on earth they were leaving him behind. So, the Polish commanding officers huddled together and pulled off what might be the greatest bureaucratic workaround in human history. They realized the British regulation only banned pets. It said nothing about enlisted personnel. So right there on the docks, they contacted official Polish Army headquarters and formally enlisted the bear into the military. I am not making this up. They gave him an official service number, 253. They gave him a rank, Private Wojtek. They issued him an official Army paybook, assigned him to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, and even set up a bank account for his salary, which was paid entirely in double rations of food, beer, and cigarettes. When the Polish soldiers marched back up to the British transport ship, they handed the port official Private Wojtek's official paperwork. The British officer stared at the paybook, stared at the 500-pound bear standing on his hind legs giving him a crisp military salute, sighed the deep, soul-crushing sigh of a middle manager who is way too tired to argue, and said, "Welcome aboard, Private." But Wojtek was not just getting a free ride to Europe, because where they were going, the Polish army was not going to need a mascot. They were going to need a miracle worker. Which brings us right back to May 1944, and the bloody slopes of Monte Cassino in Italy. If you do not know your World War II history, Monte Cassino was a mountaintop abbey that the German army had turned into an impenetrable fortress. The Allies had been trying to take that mountain for months, suffering thousands of casualties in a brutal, muddy, vertical meat grinder. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company had the nightmare job of driving trucks as close to the front lines as possible, and then manually carrying heavy wooden crates of artillery shells up the steep rocky slopes to the artillery guns, while enemy sniper fire and mortars rained down all around them. These crates weighed about 100 pounds each. It normally took 4 exhausted men to lift one crate and carry it through the mud. Wojtek sat by the trucks, watching his human friends struggling, sweating, and risking their lives. And then, without anyone giving him a command, the bear stood up on his hind legs, walked over to a truck, and held out his paws. A bewildered soldier gently lowered a 100-pound crate of high explosives into the bear's arms. Wojtek grabbed it, turned around, and effortlessly walked it right up the mountain to the gun battery. Now, I know there are skeptics out there. I can already hear people saying, "Come on, that is just a tall tale soldiers tell at the bar. A bear did not actually haul ammunition under fire." But we have hard, documented evidence. An Allied British soldier named John Clark left a detailed eyewitness account of sitting at his gun position during the heat of the battle and watching in absolute jaw-dropping disbelief as a massive bear casually walked out of the tree line, carrying a huge box of artillery shells, set it down neatly, and walked back down the hill for another load. Wojtek did this over and over again for days. He never dropped a single crate. He never flinched at the sound of explosions. He single-handedly moved tons of ammunition that helped the Allies finally break through the German lines and capture the fortress. Following the battle, the Polish High Command was so impressed by their furry logistics machine that they officially promoted Wojtek from private to corporal. That is right. A literal bear outranked half the human soldiers in the Allied forces. And to immortalize their hero, the 22nd Artillery Supply Company redesigned their official military emblem. From that day forward, every truck, uniform, and flag in the unit proudly displayed the image of a bear carrying a massive artillery shell. But what happens to a bear soldier when the war finally ends? In 1945, the guns fell silent, but for the Polish soldiers, there was no happy homecoming. Poland had fallen under Soviet control, and going back meant risking imprisonment or death. So, the unit was demobilized and relocated to exile in Scotland. And naturally, they brought Corporal Wojtek with them. For a couple of years, he lived on a Scottish farm, becoming a local celebrity who attended community dances and even helped the veterans carry heavy fence posts around the village. But when the unit finally disbanded for good in 1947, they had to make the hardest decision of their lives. They could not release a beer-drinking, cigarette-eating Syrian brown bear into the Scottish Highlands. So, Wojtek was given an honorable retirement at the Edinburgh Zoo. He never forgot who he was, though, and he never forgot his boys. For the rest of his life, until he passed away in 1963 at the age of 21, former Polish soldiers would travel from all over the world to visit him at the zoo. When regular visitors walked by, Wojtek was just a sleepy, normal bear, but the second he heard someone shout his name in the Polish language, he would instantly stand up on his hind legs, throw his shoulders back, and give a crisp military salute. His old veteran buddies would literally jump over the zoo fences into his enclosure to wrestle with him, much to the absolute horror of the zookeepers, and they would toss lit cigarettes and bottles of beer into his cage, just like the old days in the desert. Corporal Wojtek was not just a mascot who gamed the system, he was a beacon of hope for a group of men who had lost everything else in the world, proving that sometimes, when human bureaucracy and the horrors of war push you to the absolute brink, you just need to recruit a bear. Now, if you thought a beer-guzzling bear in the Polish army was the craziest animal story of World War II, just wait until you hear about the time the United States Navy tried to wire live bombs to bats and drop them on enemy cities. But trust me, that story is way too insane for just one sitting, so hit that subscribe button, check out the next video, and go lift something heavy today. Just do not eat the tobacco.